I honestly don't know if I'm a hero or a monster for what I did, but when I looked through that cracked window and saw those kids living like rats in a literal mountain of garbage, I knew I couldn't just walk away. My sister had been hiding this secret for 6 years, and the moment I called the authorities on her, I knew I was destroying her life, but I was also saving the only family I had left. Was I wrong for betraying my own blood to save her children? Or would you have let them rot in that filth just to keep the peace? I need you to listen to how this started because I am still losing sleep over the screams I heard when the police finally broke down that door. It all started when my sister, Sarah, stopped letting me come over to her house. We were always close growing up, but after she had her second child, she became incredibly reclusive. She'd make every excuse in the book. The kids were sick, the house was a mess, she was tired from work, but it went on for years. I'd see her at our parents' place, and she looked fine, maybe a little disheveled, but nothing that screamed emergency. She always smelled slightly like stale cigarettes and old laundry, but I figured that was just the stress of being a single mom. Her kids, Leo and Mia, were always quiet, way too quiet for 5- and 7-year-olds, and they always wore long sleeves, even in the dead of the summer heat. I tried to brush it off as her being an overprotective or quirky parent, but my gut was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. Every time I offered to drop off groceries or help her with chores, she'd meet me at the end of her driveway, take the bags, and practically sprint back to the front door, locking it before I could even get out of my car. This went on for years, a slow-burning suspicion that I tried to ignore because honestly, who wants to believe their sister is a monster? I remember one specific Thanksgiving where she showed up 3 hours late, and when Leo sat down to eat, he started stuffing rolls into his pockets. I laughed it off at the time, thinking he was just a growing boy, but Sarah's face went white. She grabbed his arm so hard it left a mark and hissed at him to stop. I should have known then. I should have seen the desperation in that little boy's eyes. But you trust your family, right? You assume they have the same basic level of humanity that you do. As the years crawled by, the excuses became more elaborate. She claimed the plumbing was being fixed so we couldn't use the bathroom, or that she was renovating and didn't want anyone to trip over tools. It was a calculated, slow-motion descent into madness that she masked with a smile and a tired sigh. I began to notice a physical change in her too. She looked hollow, her skin a graying shade of pale, and she started twitching whenever the doorbell rang. My parents, bless their hearts, are from a generation where you don't poke your nose into other people's business, even if it's your own daughter. They kept telling me to give her space, and that parenting is hard for everyone. But I knew this wasn't just hard parenting. This was a dark, suffocating secret that was growing behind those closed curtains. The neighborhood kids started calling it the ghost house, and neighbors began complaining to the city about the swarms of flies and the pungent, sweet smell of rot that wafted over the fence on humid days. Sarah just ignored the citations, letting the fines pile up like the trash inside. I spent nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the inside of that house looked like. I had nightmares of my nieces being trapped under falling towers of cardboard. The psychological weight of my suspicion was becoming unbearable, a heavy stone in my chest that wouldn't let me breathe. Every time I saw a news story about a neglected child, my mind immediately went to Sarah's house. I was terrified of what I'd find, but I was even more terrified of what would happen if I found nothing and ruined our relationship forever. The conflict was eating me alive. I felt like a spy in my own family, watching her every move for a sign of the truth. I started driving by her house at night, seeing the flickering light of a television through the gaps in the black plastic, knowing there were children in there who hadn't played in a park for years. The guilt of my own inaction began to feel like a crime in itself. I even tried to trick her once, telling her I had a surprise for the kids that was too big to bring to the driveway. But she just snapped at me, saying she'd collect it later, and slammed the door. That was the moment I realized her shame had become more powerful than her love for her children. She was protecting her hoard like a dragon, and the kids were just collateral damage. I started researching hoarding disorders late at night, horrified to find that this often ends in tragedy, with floors collapsing or fires starting that no one can escape from. Every day I didn't act, I felt like I was tightening the noose around those kids' necks. The breaking point happened last Tuesday. I decided I wasn't going to take no for an answer anymore. I told myself I was just going to show up with a pizza and force a girls' night, because I missed my nieces. When I pulled up to the curb, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't just stale. It was the literal scent of decay drifting from the porch. The windows were covered in heavy black plastic from the inside, and the grass was nearly waist-high. I knocked, and I heard a frantic shuffling inside, like heavy objects being dragged across a floor. Sarah didn't open the door. Instead, she yelled through the wood, her voice sounding high-pitched and terrified, telling me to go away because they were all napping. I didn't leave. I walked around to the side of the house where a small basement window was slightly ajar. I pushed aside some overgrown bushes, and what I saw will haunt me until the day I die. It wasn't just a messy house, it was a hoarding nightmare. Piles of trash reached the ceiling. I could see Leo sitting on a flattened cardboard box on top of a heap of rotting fast food containers. There were bugs everywhere, and the floor was just layers of old newspapers soaked in what looked like animal waste. He was holding a dry piece of bread, staring at a wall that was crawling with roaches. I didn't even think. I just started shaking. I went back to my car, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I sat there for 20 minutes trying to breathe. I thought about the birthdays we celebrated at my parents' house, where Sarah would bring the kids in clean clothes she had clearly just bought, only to take them back to this living hell. The level of deception was staggering. She had built a fortress of filth to hide her shame, and her children were the prisoners. I saw a rat scurry across the windowsill, a fat, confident creature that clearly owned the place more than the humans did. The air coming out of that basement window was thick and humid, smelling of ammonia and spoiled milk. It felt like I was looking into a different dimension, a dark reflection of the life we were supposed to be living. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean my head against the steering wheel. My own sister had let it get this far. How do you look at your children every morning and think this is okay? How do you sleep while your son sits on a box of garbage? The realization that I didn't know the woman behind that door at all hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just struggling, she was gone, replaced by a ghost who lived in a graveyard of her own making. Every memory of us playing together as kids flashed before my eyes, and I couldn't reconcile that happy girl with the person who was currently hiding behind a locked door in a house of rot. I remembered her as the girl who used to brush my hair and tell me stories, and now she was the person who allowed her children to live in a biohazard. The cognitive dissonance was enough to make me scream. I looked at the pizza box sitting on my passenger seat, and realized how pathetic my attempts at fixing this were. A pizza wasn't going to fix 6 years of psychological decay. The weight of the world felt like it was sitting on my shoulders. I thought about my parents and how they would react. I thought about the family holidays and the smiles we all forced for the camera. It was all a lie. The realization that I was the only person on this planet who knew the truth about what was happening in that house was terrifying. I felt like I was holding a bomb, and no matter what I did, someone was going to get hurt. If I walked away, the kids would suffer. If I stayed, the family would explode. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I stared at the keypad, my thumb hovering over the numbers. I thought about Leo's face through that window. I thought about the silence of the house. It wasn't the silence of sleep. It was the silence of fear. I realized that if I didn't act now, I would never have the courage to do it again. I would be just as guilty as she was. So that's the reality I was staring at. My sister, my own flesh and blood, was keeping her children in a literal dumpster, and she was prepared to lie to my face until the day they died in there. I had a choice. I could keep her secret and try to help her clean it, which I knew would take months and probably never happen. Or I could call the cops and risk her going to prison, and the kids going into the system. Before I tell you the absolute chaos that happened next, I want you to pause right now and tell me in the comments what you would have done. Would you protect your sister? Or would you burn her world down to save the kids? I chose the kids. I called 911 right there in the driveway. When the police and CPS arrived, Sarah lost her mind. She came screaming out of the house, looking like a different person, clawing at the officers and screaming that I was a traitor and a snitch. When they finally forced their way inside, one of the officers literally vomited on the porch. They found paths, tiny narrow tunnels, cut through the trash that led to the bedrooms. The beds were just piles of old clothes and literal garbage. Mia was found hiding in a closet behind stacks of moldy magazines. She didn't even know what a bathtub was because the plumbing hadn't worked in 2 years. They were using buckets. My sister was arrested on the spot for child endangerment and neglect. The scene was chaotic. Sirens were wailing, neighbors were coming out of their houses with cameras, and Sarah was being dragged to a patrol car. Her hair matted and her eyes wild with a mixture of rage and humiliation. I stood there, frozen, as the paramedics carried Leo and Mia out. They were wrapped in clean white blankets, their small faces pale and blinking in the sunlight like they hadn't seen it in years. The paramedics had to wear respirators just to enter the kitchen. They found the carcasses of 3 cats that had been dead for months, buried under piles of junk mail. The horror just kept unfolding. Every room they opened revealed a new layer of trauma. The kitchen was a biohazard. The fridge was taped shut because of the smell of the rot inside. There was no actual food in the house, just empty wrappers and mountain of soda cans. My sister kept screaming my name, her voice cracking, calling me a backstabber, and promising that she'd never let me see the kids again. It felt like I was watching a movie, a terrible low-budget horror film. Except this was my life. The police sergeant walked up to me, his face grim, and asked if I was the one who called. When I nodded, he just placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You probably saved their lives today, ma'am. They wouldn't have lasted the winter in there." Those words should have comforted me, but they only made the guilt heavier. I watched the black plastic being ripped from the windows by the investigators, letting light into that tomb for the first time in over half a decade. The sunlight revealed just how bad it was. Dust motes dancing over mountains of debris that reached the ceiling fans. It was a monument to mental illness and neglect. As they led her away in handcuffs, she spat at me and told me I was dead to her. My parents are furious at me, saying I should have handled it within the family, and that I've ruined Sarah's life forever. They think I'm the villain because now the kids are in temporary foster care while I fight for custody, and Sarah is facing years in prison. They keep calling me, crying, saying that Sarah is sick and needs a doctor, not a jail cell. I agree she's sick, but the kids were the ones paying the price for her sickness. The fallout has been explosive. My father refuses to speak to me, and my mother sends me daily texts about how family sticks together no matter what. It makes me feel like I'm losing my mind. Is the definition of family really just a suicide pact where we all go down together to keep a secret? I spent the next 3 days in a daze, working with lawyers and social workers. I had to undergo background checks and home inspections just to be considered as a guardian. The system is slow and cold, but it's still better than that house. When I finally got to see the kids in the hospital, the transformation was heartbreaking. They had been scrubbed clean, their hair cut to remove the mats and lice, and they were wearing hospital gowns. Leo wouldn't look at me at first. He just stared at the tray of food in front of him, a simple sandwich and some apple slices, like he was waiting for someone to take it away. Mia, on the other hand, was fascinated by the sink. She kept turning the water on and off, watching it disappear down the drain with wide-eyed wonder. When I visited them yesterday in the hospital, and Mia saw a clean bed for the first time, and asked if she was allowed to touch the white sheets, I knew I did the right thing. The trauma didn't end with the rescue. The social worker told me that Mia had developed a habit of eating paper because she was so used to having no actual food. Leo, the older one, felt like he had failed his mother because he couldn't keep the secret better. He actually apologized to me for being seen through the window. Can you imagine the level of brainwashing and fear that child must have lived under to apologize for being rescued from a trash heap? It makes my skin crawl. Every time I think about the years I spent being polite and giving Sarah space, I want to scream at myself. My parents' house is now a shrine to Sarah's victimhood. They talk about her as if she's a political prisoner, completely ignoring the fact that her children were literally rotting away. They've even started a legal fund for her defense while refusing to contribute a single dime to the kids' therapy. It has created a rift in our family that I don't think will ever heal. I've had to block my own mother because she kept sending me photos of Sarah as a baby, trying to guilt-trip me into dropping the charges. As if I even have the power to do that. The house has been condemned and is literally being demolished because the structural damage from the rot is too far gone. The mold had eaten through the floorboards, and the roof was on the verge of collapsing. It wasn't a home, it was a trap. The demolition crew had to wear full hazmat suits just to clear the debris. They found things that weren't even in the police report: vials of prescription pills, thousands of dollars in uncashed checks buried in old magazines, and more animal remains. It was a literal tomb. As I stood on the sidewalk watching the wrecking ball swing, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with profound sadness. That house was a physical manifestation of my sister's broken mind. I saw old toys being tossed into the dumpster, toys I had given them for birthdays that they were never allowed to play with because the floor was too dangerous. I saw the mattress where they slept, stained and ruined, being hauled away. Every load of trash that left that property felt like a weight being lifted from the kids' futures. But the damage isn't just physical. The psychological scars are deep. Leo won't go into a room if the door is closed. Mia still hides food in her shoes. They don't know how to play with other children because they've been isolated for so long. The school district says they are years behind in their development. I spend my evenings reading to them, trying to catch them up, but the look of confusion on their faces when I mention things like parks or restaurants is a constant reminder of what they lost. My sister's legal team is now trying to say that I'm only doing this to get her inheritance or some other nonsense. They are painting me as the greedy sister who wanted to tear a mother away from her children. It's disgusting. The court dates are looming, and I have to prepare myself to see Sarah again. The last time I saw her, she was being shoved into a van. Now I'll have to sit across from her and tell a judge why she should never be allowed near Leo and Mia again. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. My parents have stopped answering my calls entirely. They sent me a letter via a cousin saying that until I make things right with Sarah, I am no longer welcome in their home. They are choosing a hoarder and an abuser over their own grandchildren. It's a level of betrayal I can't even begin to process. I find myself crying in the shower so the kids won't see me. I have to be strong for them, but who is being strong for me? I've joined a support group for families of hoarders, and hearing other people's stories helps. But nothing prepares you for the sheer scale of the neglect I witnessed. I think about that basement window every single night. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't looked. They would have stayed in there. They would have grown up. If they survived, thinking that trash was normal, and that the world was a dark, cramped tunnel. I'm trying to create a new life for us, but the shadow of the old house is long. I've started a garden in my backyard, and seeing the kids touch the dirt and pull up weeds is like watching them reclaim their humanity. They are slowly realizing that the earth is clean, and that things can grow if you care for them. It's a slow process, but we're getting there. Leo smiled for the first time yesterday when I brought home a puppy. He asked if the puppy was allowed to have a name. It's those little questions that remind me why I did what I did. I didn't just ruin a life, I started 2 new ones. The cost was high, but the reward is seeing them laugh. My sister is still sending letters from jail, filled with venom and threats. She blames me for the loss of her collection, more than the loss of her kids. That's the most chilling part. She doesn't miss them, she misses the trash. It's a sickness I'll never understand. I have to be the one to break the cycle. I have to show these kids that family isn't about secrets and shame. It's about truth and safety. I lost my sister that day, and I might have lost my parents too, but I saved 2 lives that were being swallowed by filth and silence. Sometimes being loyal to your family means being a silent accomplice to a crime. And I refuse to let that be my legacy. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, even if it means being the villain in my sister's story. The road to recovery for Leo and Mia will be years long. They have night terrors, they hoard food under their pillows even now, and they are terrified of the dark. But they are safe. They are learning that the world isn't made of trash, and that they deserve to be loved and cared for. I am learning to live with the silence from my parents and the venom from my sister. I am learning that blood doesn't make you a family, safety and love do. I'm watching them slowly discover the world. Things as simple as a strawberry or a clean towel are miracles to them. It's both beautiful and devastating. I've had to quit my job to focus on their care and the upcoming court cases. And even though my bank account is draining, my soul feels fuller than it has in years. I know there are people watching this who might think I'm heartless for sending my sister to prison. But I want you to imagine those two small faces staring at a wall of roaches, and tell me you'd do anything different. If you ever find yourself in a position where you see something that makes your blood run cold, don't wait 6 years like I did. Trust your gut. Even if it means breaking your own heart to do what's right. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by calling the cops, and hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories about people standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I overstep? Or did I do what a real aunt should do? Do you think my parents are right to be angry? Or are they just as guilty as Sarah for looking the other way? Would you be able to forgive a sibling who did this? I'll be reading all your comments because honestly, I need to know I'm not alone in this. I'll see you all in the next story.